the moment that you have all been waiting for. I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker. So anyone who has traveled to Europe has seen those ubiquitous blue and yellow guidebooks in the hands of eager travelers. Today, we're excited to have the author of those best-selling books, who for the past 30 years has been a champion for seeing Europe through the back door. He's also a popular television host, outspoken activist, and owner of a travel business that brings more than 30,000 people to Europe annually. IATDG and TourPros, we are happy to welcome Rick Steves as our keynote speaker today. I'd like to turn the time over to my IATDG colleague, Elaine Rodriguez, who will be interviewing Mr. Steves. We welcome you to put in any questions that you might have in the chat. We'll be monitoring and will, if time allows, ask him some of those questions at the end of the interview and get his expert insight. So without further ado, take it away, Elaine.
Thanks, Vaughn. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Rick. We're so excited to have you here.
Nice to be with you.
Well, let's just jump right in. So you got your start in the travel industry writing guidebooks and later moved into the group tour market. So last year, your company, Rick Steves Europe, brought over 30,000 travelers from the US to Europe. That's 1,200 bus tours. And so can you tell this audience of group tour professionals what motivated you to get into the travel industry? Or I'm sorry, get into group travel?
Well, it's been an interesting story. Actually, I was leading minibus tours back in the 1970s. I wrote my first book in 1980, and my books actually came out of the tour work I did. I had handbooks for my tours that I would have laying around when I was giving a talk, and I'd let people look at the handbook and I'd hope they'd take my tour, and they ended up stealing the handbook so they could do the tour without me. So I thought, these books are driving decent people to theft. I should make them available for purchase. So literally, my first tours, I only did 22-day tours. I was on a one-man crusade to help Americans have longer vacations. And my books were called, Germany in 22 days, or France in 22 days, or Britain in 22 days. People who used my books back in the 80s, that was what they were. And these were designed so people could would do exactly what I did on my tours. And I honestly put everything I knew about leading my tours into the book so people could do my tours without me. People said, oh, you're going to lose all your work. No, it's just there's some people that are hell-bent on doing it on their own with a book, and others want to take a tour, let somebody else do the driving. So it made perfect sense. Eventually we got rid of the 22-day name, and now it's just Rick Steves Germany or Rick Steves France. But it still is that very careful approach to taking care of your time as well as your money. We grew up on, boomers grew up with Arthur Fromer's Europe on $5 a day or whatever. It was $5 a day or $50 a day in the end. And it was taking care of your money. My first books were Europe in 22 days, taking care of your time, recognizing that Americans have the shortest vacations in the rich world, and we got to take care of our time as well as our money. So I'm tired of hearing people say you can spend a lifetime in Florence. Of course you can spend a lifetime in Florence, but I'm an American. I've got 1.5 days. Now, how will I use them, you see? And I know from my own teaching, people really appreciate it when they're planning a trip to England and they ask, should I do Oxford or are they playing an itinerary and they're doing Oxford and Cambridge, and I'll tell them you should not do Oxford and Cambridge, do one or other of the great university towns and save up time for something different on your itinerary, like castles in North Wales or hiking in the Cumbrian Lake District. So, designing your time is really, really important, and it is to this day. So, but way back in the beginning, I was just doing minibus tours, me with 8 people on a minibus, and I thought that was just great. And they were very communal. It's just me. We didn't have reservations for hotels, just cost a couple $100. I was just finding a way to extend my trip and not have to go home. And the trips got better and better. And it occurred to me that I could, I was really militant about independent travel. I'm all about independent travel, Europe through the back door. Anybody smart enough to read this book can do Europe without being spoon-fed by a tour guide. And then I started to realize, no, there's efficiencies and economies of group travel, and there's the beauty of independent travel. And my goal was to mix it all together. So that's what I did. and I escorted tours on some big main industry companies, and I saw the pros and cons of 50 people on a bus. And I decided to come up with kind of a hybrid where I had that turn on a dime, feisty small group approach, and also the beautiful economy of having a large group of people. For me, a large group is 25. I know a lot of companies go bigger than that, but then you have the economy to invest in different experiences in Europe for the group that a single traveler or family could not afford. And from a business point of view, I saw it really clear. I could scale up and more people could enjoy the Rick Steves approach to Europe, and I could make a lot of money. So it was just a beautiful thing. And I've been growing my tour program every year until last year, when we were just going crazy with, for us, 30,000 people was a lot. And the tour business that I've done has helped subsidize the other work that I do at Rick Steves Europe. I employ 100 people, and we write guidebooks, make TV shows, make radio shows, provide a lot of information with our apps and so on. But really the main source of income is our tour program.
Great. Well, as tour directors and guides, we act as ambassadors of culture for our guests, hopefully giving them a deeper understanding of what they're seeing, of what they're experiencing, enhancing their perspective on wherever they are. How would you define culture? And what do you believe are the best aspects of culture to focus on?
Boy, culture is, I mean, when you think about it, this is what it's all about. Now, I should say my focus is Europe. For me, my mission as a company is to inspire Americans to venture beyond Orlando. And I see Europe as the wading pool for world exploration. So I just do Europe. My favorite places to travel may not be Europe. My favorite countries are India or Indonesia or Japan, but I'm really focused on Europe. I'm well networked in Europe. And for me, it's the springboard for more travels. So when I think of culture anywhere, but a lot of my anecdotes and so on are in Europe, culture is like a painter having more colors on his palette when he's painting what his life's all about. And you need to experience the different colors of that culture. Another metaphor might be a good traveler is like a chameleon. I'm like a chameleon when I'm traveling. It's just I'm almost physically a chameleon when I'm here in the United States. I don't make tea. I don't think I've got a tea bag in my house here. It doesn't make sense to me in this hemisphere. But when I'm in England, after a nice day of sightseeing, a spot of tea feels really good. I don't drink whiskey unless I'm in Scotland. And when I'm in Scotland, I have a ritual of going to a beautiful whiskey aficionados shop on the Royal Mile, and I buy a little flask of whiskey, and then every night I have a wee dram. It's just right in Scotland. I never let a day go by in Greece without enjoying a nice cloudy glass of ouzo while watching the sunset if I'm on a Greek isle. I've never come home after a long day of work in Seattle and thought, I feel like a nice glass of ouzo. It just doesn't appeal to me unless I'm there. People say chocolate is to die for. That's nonsense, unless you're in Belgium. And then you really get into Belgium chocolate, and I'll go to the finest little gourmet chocolateria and buy the finest chocolate I can. I don't think I've ever had a beer in Tuscany because it's a nice Corposo glass of red wine. And I don't think I've ever had a glass of wine in Prague because that's my favorite Pilsner in all of Europe. So I like that from a cultural point of view to really embrace wherever you are. Now, culture is also helping us understand the context of where we're traveling today. And I have a history degree, and that really helps me. So that gives me some historic context. And today's culture gives us a contemporary context. And all of this is important if we're going to be teaching the cultures. And when we're considering all the challenges confronting us these days, I just think it's thrilling that our countries can compare notes on how their culture addresses serious challenges. And I do that in a lot of my political activism and stuff. I share the sensibilities I've had from my friends in Europe. But for me, I like to go home a hybrid. If I'm having a good trip, it's transformational. And if I'm a guide and I want to give my tour members a good trip, it's going to be transformational. They'll take home with them slices of that culture. If I think how my travels have changed me, I really appreciate fine German pianos because, I've seen the factories over there and I appreciate the German workmanship. I've got a German grand in my next room. I understand why a smart country wants to pay high taxes because I've talked to Scandinavians about this, and they have high expectations and they get a great return for their taxes, and they see it generally as a good value. I understand why the Dutch don't arrest pot smokers and why they sell their marijuana in coffee shops. I understand why the French love their foie gras. And I understand in Italy, the beauty of la dolce far niente, the sweetness of doing nothing. And you cross the border into Italy and you go, this is the land of the sweetness of doing nothing. Well, I can take a little bit of that home with me. So I really like that. And you can break out of Europe also. I mean, when you go to India, you realize time is not money. When I go to Turkey, I never let a day go by without playing backgammon. It's a daily treat. So these are wonderful dimensions of culture that we pick up in our travels. And as a tour guide, I love to make sure that my travelers get a chance to be temporary locals as they travel, and maybe takes home some of those passions, some of those colors on their palette as souvenirs.
Going back to what you mentioned about some of the challenges we face today and your political sensibilities and all that, I'm curious, has the present focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion suggested any new opportunities in this area?
Well, for me, the whole challenge for us travelers, especially privileged white Americans, is to get out there and realize that we are not the norm, and to understand that we are privileged, and to understand that there's nothing to be afraid of. There's a lot of fear in our world, and a lot of it's based on, I think, racial fear. The most frightened people in our country, a lot of them I think might be white Americans in the middle of our great nation with no passports, whose worldview is shaped by commercial TV news. If I can take a group outside of our world and then they realize that, there's 96% outside of our borders, and they don't all look like me. They don't celebrate Christmas like me. They don't dress like me. That would be scary. That would be threatening if you had never had a tour guide, perhaps, to hold your hand as you get to know that. And it's a beautiful thing to realize that this is not a threat against me. I remember when I was an early tour guide, I took people to Europe, and I noticed a lot of times they would clench their fist and they would draw back and they'd say, no, that's not how we do things. Christmas is not 25, 12, 20. Christmas is 12, 25, 20. You know what I mean? Tourists are always screwing it up when they fill out the little form, because in America we put the month and the day than the year. Well, it's not right or wrong, but if you wanted to go to the mat over it, it does make more sense to progress from little to middle to big, day, month, year, rather than month, day, year. So the American is thinking, no, we fought and died for your way of life, and I'm not going to sit here and let you tell me that Christmas is not 12, 25, 20. So there's that psychological defensiveness. And we've got to realize that everybody doesn't have the American dream. The world's not a pyramid with us on top and everybody else trying to figure out how to get there.
Right.
That's important. And that's difficult for some travelers. It's culture shock. And for me, culture shock is the growing pains of a broadening perspective. And I don't want to throw people in over their head so they just get all stressed out. But if, as a tour guide, you can artfully help somebody realize that the world is full of diversity, and that's something to celebrate. So that's been my passion for decades. And I think it does relate to what's going on in our discussion now.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that answer. So talking about painting the palette for the guest culture, what are some tips you can give our guides on how to do that? Our tour partners and guides.
Well, I just thinking of my experience as a tour guide in Europe, one of my favorite things is to cross the border between Switzerland and France on our Best of Europe tour. And my first dinner with the group in France, everybody's going to have an escargot. It seems kind of silly, but a lot of people are scared to death of an escargot and they'll never try one in their whole life. So if I have 24 people on the bus and 24 people in the restaurant tonight, I buy 24 escargot. That's easy. I pay for it out of my little slush fund for, amazing experiences. And everybody gets an escargot. I give them the story and the culture, the context. And then I pretty heavy-handedly make everybody try one escargot. You don't need to like it, but you got to eat one. half of the people scrunch up their nose and they don't think they're going to like it. And it's amazing how many people are thankful they had that escargot. And at the next restaurant the next night, they're on their own and they order half a dozen for themselves. That's a beautiful thing. I like to, as much as possible, and it's a struggle with me with restaurateurs in Europe with my tour groups, but I like to have family style dining so we can share things. I'd much rather have a little slice of 4 desserts instead of one big giant dessert for myself. So maximizing the cultural experience for me when at the restaurant. I like to tackle things that cause Americans anxiety. Foie gras, force-fed geese. You know, everybody is weeping for force-fed geese. Well, without saying what's right or wrong, explain to your Americans what is the culture behind foie gras. And we even go to a goose farm in the Dordogne and talk to a farmer about the case for force feeding the geese and learn. I don't want to make the whole case here, but it changes the whole thing. And then you realize why English people just go down to the Dordogne in droves for the foie gras. One of my favorite experiences as a tour guide in Turkey is to sit cross-legged on the carpet in a mosque and talk with an imam. How many of my Americans go through their lives afraid of Islam and they've never really had a Muslim friend? They've never talked to a Muslim pastor. Well, we make it a point every time we take a group to Turkey to sit on the carpet in a mosque with an imam and have a cultural sharing time. I remember organizing my friends in Oslo to meet us in the city hall, and we would just sit down at a table in an empty room in the city hall and talk to Scandinavians about how they organize their government and why they are so enthusiastic about not seeing society as a choice like we do between big bad government and little good government. But what about the option of big good government? Are they miserable socialists, or are they just efficient, compassionate communities that like to work together, not with 1,000 points of light, but with a collective searchlight, making sure the problems in their society are addressed smartly and efficiently, economically, and compassionately? These are strong issues. And I think a lot of tour companies might ask their guides, don't talk about religion and don't talk about politics. And a lot of times don't talk about soccer, okay? But I tell my guides, talk about religion, talk about politics, talk about soccer, but do it in a way that's respectful and let people draw their own conclusions. And that makes a richer travel experience. It raises the bar. You could just take people to the beach, but for me, that's boring. And for my guides, that's boring.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of, let's say, topics that conventional wisdom says that we shouldn't touch, as you said, religion, politics, and soccer, if you're in Europe, especially. But from time to time, a topic might come up that's critical to speak about, but it's particularly challenging to handle, particularly when you're a tour director or guide that's not native to that area. Yeah. And so, as we're talking about foie gras, that's a good example, but I'm also thinking about conflicts that are may speak to guests in a more personal way. So thinking about things like Protestant versus Catholic and the Republic of Ireland and Ireland and the Palestinian-Israel conflict. So do you have any tricks for speaking on or transitioning into these challenging topics in a way that, particularly when you're a guide who may not be local enough to truly give an inside perspective?
Yeah, that's a challenge sometimes because your local guide could do it, but they don't have quite the communication skills or the sensibility about what's the American perspective. Mm-hmm. And I've got more of that without the European intimacy because I'm not a European. But my politics are pretty much European. I'm a liberal person here, but I would be middle of the road in Europe.
Yeah.
And you know, I enjoy the challenge of helping people come home with more of a European politic. And I know that half my bus would be right-wingers and half my bus would be liberals.
Right.
Which is fine. They're beautiful people. They just have different political views, obviously. I find it's really helpful for me to do 2 things right off the bat. First of all, they know I'm a Christian, just because I live like I'm a Christian, and I'm not afraid of sharing that. And also, I'm not a fundamentalist type Christian where I would think I've got it right and everybody else has got it wrong. So I just love going into synagogues and learning and being worshipful. I love going into mosques and respecting that. Also, I'm a businessman. I'm a great capitalist, and I would not want to run my business in Europe. And I say that I'm so thankful I'm running my business in America because I can turn on a dime and I'm not encumbered by all these regulations and so on. And then I say, well, European has a lot of things that we don't get, but I'm really glad we have this freewheeling style of capitalism in our country. And then I will say, but I believe the government should be a chaperone because capitalism needs a chaperone or it's going to be a mess. And then I also make a good point to say I'm thankful for how our military has saved freedom in Europe, and how Europeans are thankful that they're not living under fascism or communism. And that's because of American valor. When you say that, all of a sudden people listen to you. And I explain this to my guides. And as soon as you acknowledge those things, then the person that's likely to shut you down when you talk about healthcare or taking care of workers or being concerned about climate change, all these crazy things that Europeans take seriously, they listen to you better. And I tell my guides, you don't need to deal with this stuff, but I want to stand by you because America needs to hear this. And then what we do is we frame it in a way that it's not that this is right and you're wrong. It's just, this is how we do it in Europe. We don't lock up people for smoking marijuana. It just makes no sense to us. We consider it a challenge. It's a drug. It can be abused. It can be addictive. But people who are addicted to hard drugs, they're not criminals. They're sick people. They need compassion. They need coaching. They need a helping hand. And then, I'm talking more about hard drugs than marijuana. But, and then I've got a little background. I got my little spiel. In Portugal, the word for you're not addicted, the word is enslaved. It's a different sort of approach to it. And 20 years ago, Portugal was innovative, and they made a law that legalized the consumption of all drugs, hard and soft, because they had a terrible problem with opioids, like we do in the United States. And the conservatives who opposed that were in power 10 years later, and they liked the law, and they re-upped the law. And they found that marijuana use stayed the same. Their hard drug addicted population was aging and shrinking. They didn't have the drug tourism that they feared, and their law enforcement could be redirected at more important things, and they liked their law. And the sky's not falling. In the United States, I understand you people lock up 600,000 or arrest 600,000 people a year. They're not rich white people, they're poor people and people of color. And I understand in the United States, you've got 60,000 people in jail today for nonviolent marijuana offenses. Here in Europe, joint's about as exciting as a can of beer. We've got better things to do with our law enforcement because rather than moralize and legislate, we realize that a society has to make a choice. Tolerate alternative lifestyles or build more prisons. You guys lock up 10 times as many people per capita as we do. So we have an approach called pragmatic harm reduction. And when you use that word pragmatic harm reduction, whenever you have a Republican president, the proposition is discarded out of hand because that's not okay to be talking about pragmatic harm reduction because you're talking about an alternative to incarceration. But this is just what we do in Europe. And, and statistically, we smoke less pot than you Americans do by every country's estimates. That's just kind of fun. You can do that with your travelers if you're a European, if you do it with a smile and you say, it's just what we do. And we're happy about that. And then you walk by a coffee shop in Amsterdam and you realize, oh, they know what they're doing. It's just not hedonism gone wild. It's good policy. I love the opportunity to have a chance like that. And then on deck is prostitution. So, and then here comes foie gras. That's a rough and tumble day. So you got to lighten it up and take people shopping and have a cheese tasting then.
Oh, that sounds great to me. So our membership is engaged and makes their living by accompanying guests in what you define as both escapism and reality travel. Can you define what you mean by those terms? And do you see any crossover? And what are the benefits to each type of travel?
Yeah, and I want to be careful. I want to be clear. Nothing's exclusive. You just have options. And to me, there's three kinds of travel. There's tourists, there's travelers, and there's pilgrims. And a tourist, for me, a tourist has a bucket list. They're checking things off. A tourist just wants to have fun. A tourist is not necessarily interested in getting out of their comfort zone and having to reassess their outlook. They're just on vacation, which is fine. no problem at all. Now, a traveler is somebody who wants to get out of their comfort zone, try new things, have a little culture shock, learn about other cultures. And then a pilgrim is somebody who leaves home to learn more about their home. A pilgrim leaves home to learn more about themselves. So these are all good. And I wouldn't want to be just a pilgrim, and I wouldn't want to be just a traveler, and I wouldn't want to be just a tourist, but I like to mix it up. And if somebody invests so much time and money and has such a great guide, as the people who are listening now, I would imagine, it would be a shame for a tourist to just have that touristic experience without a little bit of that traveler experience and without a little bit of that pilgrim experience. So the art for us in organized tourism is to mix it up. So even the independent-minded person is happy. They traded off their independence to a certain degree to have a guide and the efficiency and economy of group travel. When I go to Central America, I always, and when I go to Cuba, I go with a guide. I always hire an educational tour company. Augsburg College has a thing called Center for Global Education, which I really like. And I appreciate somebody who's well connected there and gives me that traveler pilgrim experience as well as the tourist experience. So we have that option. Of course, the most money I think is in the escapism travel, and that's important. We need to be profitable. But I love to be mission driven, and I love to get people into reality travel. I love to take people beyond their comfort zone. And for me, the best souvenir is to help somebody come home with a broader perspective, somebody to come home less ethnocentric. So yeah, I think you can have it both ways, and I think you probably should have it both ways.
Mm-hmm. Well, what does a day in the life of a mixed group look like? So how can your guides delight and surprise your groups, the kind of mix that you described, keeping it fun for the escapists and then letting folks who want that culture shock growth have it?
Well, I like to have reflections times. For me, it's called reflections time, and it's optional. But before dinner, we have a happy hour in the garden of the hotel. Bring your own, buy a drink and see you there. And then we share what we're learning. And I'm not, in a case like this, I would not be the teacher. I would be the conduit, the moderator of the discussion going on. A lot of times I will even organize a guest for one of these reflections times. I love it. If I'm in Turkey, I like to let my people talk with somebody who's Kurdish, because somebody who's a Turkish tour guide I doubt if they would ever broach that Kurdish issue, because that's not something you talk about, or the Armenian situation in Turkey and so on. But Americans are concerned about this. So if you can talk to an Armenian or a Kurd in Turkey, that lets you have more of a reality time in the garden of your hotel. I like to bring newspapers onto the bus when we're going. Well, I was in Portugal, and there are daily newspapers in Portugal. I believe there's 3 daily newspapers in Portugal, and they're all soccer newspapers. They're not normal newspapers. They're all sports, like a baseball magazine or something. Every day, they've got 3 different soccer newspapers, and it's because there's these huge subcultures embracing this team or that team or that team. And this is kind of a silly little dimension of a society, but it gives an insight into the society that I think is exciting. Going to Baden-Baden in Germany, Germans go there to get naked and go to the spa. Americans are pretty nervous about getting naked in a German spa, and you don't have to do it, but you can explain to them on this spa during this time, it's mixed, and during this time it's women only, and during that time it's men only, and you can give people encouragement and permission to get naked with each other. You could do the same thing in Helsinki. How many tour guides in Helsinki encourage their groups to go to a working class neighborhood where they have the neighborhood spa, the neighborhood sauna? It's one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had, was going to the neighborhood sauna in Helsinki and hanging out in the sauna with people who are not wealthy enough to have their own private sauna, or who are not tourists going to the tourist sauna on the cruise ship or at the hotel. There are clever, fun ways that you can carbonate that experience. And for me, that's the endless challenge of being a good tour guide.
Great. Well, a part of our audience today is entrepreneur suppliers to the group travel industry. So Segway tours, local history tours, food tours by locals. So looking back to the beginning of your career, what advice can you give to someone who's just starting out in business?
As a supplier, you mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, understand what a tour operator is looking for. And more, we're looking for experiences. We didn't used to go to cooking class in Florence. Now we do. One of the best experiences I've ever had is making a fresco. We go, truffles hunting. I mean, there's so many ways we make pici pasta. There's so many ways you can set up experiences. And if I was an entrepreneur in Europe, I would let tour companies know that I've got an amazing experience, and it's something that makes sense with the group. It's something that understands who Americans are and caters to American sensibilities, at the same time, gently and memorably getting them into something that's a European experience that they'll remember for the rest of their lives. I think and the main thing is that you need to have a specialty, you need to be reliable, and you need to offer a good price. A lot of experiences are just so, to me, ridiculously expensive that it puts it out of the price range of me as a tour company. And on the other hand, some experiences where I'm going from me directly to that small provider are much more affordable, and just at a whim, I'll say, sure, I'll pay for that. I've got a friend who does cicchetti crawl in Venice. And that's a pub crawl in Venice, where you eat the little munchies, the little ugly things on toothpicks that you wash down with local wine.
Right.
And you go from pub to pub to pub in Venice. And his name's Alessandro. And we meet him on the top of the Rialto Bridge. And it's an option. And I just connect people with him. But everybody gives him, I think, $30 or $40. And then he takes them out for dinner. And they go to four or five different pubs, and they learn a lot about Venice. They make a friend in Venice, and they eat all this different food, and they just have a wonderful experience that I couldn't give them, but this local provider could give them. And that's a great option. One thing that is really, to me, important from the tour manager point of view, or the tour company point of view, when working with local providers, is for the guide to be working when that experience is going on. If I meet a guide, let's say we work with a company that does history tours in Munich, and they're taking us out to Dachau. I want to meet with the guide ahead of time, or when my group gets there, and I'll have a quick little huddle with the local guide, and I'll say that I'll give him the context of what we've done. I'll remind him that we, in our group, when 80% of the people have gathered, he can start talking, because I don't want the whole group to have to wait for the 20% who are stragglers. It's okay to straggle, but when you straggle, you're not going to compromise what everybody else is going to have time to learn from the guide. So you miss what he starts talking about. I remind my groups and the local guide that we'd rather not have your rhythm broken by a lot of questions. When you're a tour guide, there's always the eager beavers who ask too many questions. I think questions are great, but hold them until the end. Remind my travelers that there'll be time for photos. You can linger if you like during the walk and take photos, but you're not going to slow the group down. See, this is group think. I'm really into group think. It's a little bit, hard-handed, but it's the group first, and anybody who needs special treatment second. And I remind the groups that there'll be time for questions and free time for photos after the walk. But this lets my guide, who's teaching us about Dachau and the Holocaust, probably get 40% more done in the hour that he's got with this, or whatever. And then, I go along with the group on the walk. Let's just say I'm the tour manager, and we've got a 90-minute walk through Dachau, or through Amsterdam, or through whatever. I go along and I make sure that people are paying attention to him. I set an example and I enforce that example. This guy is talking to us, even if you don't care, most of our group does. Pay attention to him. Don't talk, don't ignore him. That's rude to your tour members. and it's rude to your guest guide. I'm very careful not to step on the guide's delivery, but if he says a word that we don't understand, or if he presents a concept that I know my group doesn't get, I will offer a little clarity there. And if there's a freeloader that joins our group, a lot of times if the guide's any good, you'll have freeloaders joining the group. My group has a little anxiety. My job as the tour director is to recognize anxiety and get rid of it. And what I like to do is, if we've got a freeloader, I talk to the freeloader and I say, oh, you're Jerry from Dallas. Well, you're welcome to join us, but just, stand in the back and don't ask any questions. And then I actually tell the group, Jerry from Dallas thinks we're a great tour and he wants to freeload on our tour for a couple of hours, so he's okay. That's just so much fun. It's good advertising from my tour company, and it sets everybody at ease with this stranger that's on our tour. That's the kind of, I want my guides to work when somebody else is being hired to work with the group, so that hired local guide can give us a better experience. This is my kind of hands-on guiding.
Yeah, and that's also great, because I think a lot of tour directors, particularly in countries where the local guides travel with the group, I'm thinking of places like Japan and Iceland, where you have a local guide with you at all times. It can be intimidating for a tour director when you're with someone who has so much knowledge, and what you're describing seems just to be a great way to still prove your value when you're not the one up there giving all the commentary.
You accomplish so much for the group if you go along as not the expert, but just the person who's facilitating the experience, and a lot of times a guide will they don't understand that nobody knows the word didactic. Guides in Europe love to use the word didactic, and what do you mean by didactic? So, you can, and it makes it so much more fun. And actually, one thing I like to do, Elaine, at the end of the tour, I ask the guide, do you just have 10 minutes for a general Q&A? It's not about what we're doing, but about life. Yeah. You are a 20-year-old student in Hungary. Your parents were in the communist times. How is it now? Do you have any friends and who were working with the communist police, or do you have any scars in your society right now about this? Are you embracing capitalism even more aggressively than Germans and French people because you never had it? You can ask these questions, or you can have your group ask these questions. But I love, after having a local guide, to take just a moment at the end, if the guide's comfortable with it, and just have a cultural back and forth. Choose a quiet little courtyard, maybe a place where they can sit down, and it's extra credit. I don't think most tour managers in Europe would even consider that extra credit. But if you're a mission-driven tour director, mission-driven for something other than just getting through this thing and having some money in your pocket, but coming out of this tour with a transformational experience for your travelers, it's a beautiful opportunity.
Yeah, it's great. Going back to kind of small local businesses for a minute, how does a small local business get the attention of an entity like Rick Steves Europe?
Well, I think you need to understand what is the mission of that company. I mean, you don't want to pitch yourself to one company in a way that would turn on another company. So learn about that company. I just had a Zoom conference with my providers in Europe. We had about 200 people on the line yesterday. And I just mentioned how we need each other. We are family, we are partners. We've got to be each other's cash cows. So, I mentioned how in my world, I don't even have an agent with my relationship with my publisher. I've published 50 books, and it's pretty much, it's tough for them to make money and it's tough for me to make money. Do we want to invite somebody else in and give them 15% so I can have a win-lose relationship with my publisher? Or would I rather just have a direct and friendly, we got to both be good for each other relationship? So, from a business point of view, find ways where you can be profitable for the person or the company you want to work for. I just love, connections of small businesses to small businesses in the context of our tours. And it's tough with this COVID thing. My fear about COVID is the little companies are not going to make it through, and the big companies will. And we'll all lose something if that's the case. So it's time for companies to communicate directly with each other, whether there's a larger entity that organizes or not. Just everybody realizes we've got to be efficient. I think something that a tour experience provider in Europe would want to approach me with is that they are passionate about giving people a culturally broadening experience, and also to remember that most of our travelers these days, in my world, are older travelers who are young at heart that want soft adventure.
Yeah.
So that's kind of it. We're not. It's really cool to have an ad where you've got people, canyoning and all that kind of stuff. But my people aren't going to be canyoning. I can promise you that. And I think the market I go for are the young at heart older travelers who want soft adventure. If you're going to do something for a more youthful market, you'll want to tailor your proposal to that.
Right. Well, Rick, you said it. You said the C word, COVID. So we have to talk about it, right? This is the whole reason why this conference is virtual. What outlook do you have for local businesses, for the travel business? What outlook do you have post-COVID?
Well, I've got a good outlook post-COVID. First of all, I own and run a company that we had our best year just before COVID. We're $100 million gross revenue. I've got 100 people on my staff. I've got 100 freelance guides in Europe. And we had our best year in 2019, took 30,000 people on 1,200 tours. Our fill rate was about 99%. We were euphoric. I mean, I had 100 guides right here in my living room for our annual convention. We bring all of our guides over from Europe, and we have a week-long series of workshops and so on. And we were already like 80% sold out for 2020. And then, we're just swept, the tsunami just sweeps over us of COVID. And suddenly we have to give back 22,000 deposits. And by the way, I didn't jerk anybody around with that. I make a lot of money during good years. I'm not going to put hurdles between my travelers, our tour members, and getting their money back. So it wasn't a credit for future travel. It wasn't any kind of, you got to do this or that. It was just, here's your money back. Stay in touch. We know you want to go with us, and we know we'll be traveling again soon. Now, my goal as a businessman has been, and as an ethical businessman, is to keep my staff together. So I'm keeping my team of 100 here employed. We've trimmed our sales. We're working, 3.5 or 4 days a week instead of 5. We've all still got our healthcare. It's costing me about $1 million a month to keep my tour company going. That's a lot of money. Mm-hmm. It's scary. But I'm investing in it because I know we're going to come out of it, and I want my team together because I've got a brand and I want to throttle up and get back into that profitable sort of mode. As a business, for 30 years, I've taken good years, and now for 2 years, I got to take bad years. Mm-hmm. That's doable. I'm privately held. If I was a publicly held corporation, I would have dispersed all my profit, and I'd have a board of directors that would say, no, you got to profit maximize in the short term, so you can't have that kind of approach to it, perhaps. But I know we're in a tunnel. I don't even know if there's a light at the end of the tunnel yet. I think there is just a light at the end of the tunnel coming in with this promise of a vaccine. But we don't know how bad it's going to get, and we don't know how long it's going to last, and it's going to take time. So patience is my middle name lately. And I'm not going to be the first tour company out of the gate. I'm not going to be redesigning my tours to work in a time when it's kind of still COVID, like some people I think are trying to do. I'll come back into the game 6 months later when it is reliable and predictable, and we can travel in the way that makes travel so vivid and magical, what I consider the Rick Steves style of travel, which is the opposite of social distancing. I want to go to Paris and be kissed on the cheeks. I want to go to Rome and pack into the piazza and do the passeggiata, lick my gelato. I want to go to Ireland and go into a pub where they say strangers are just friends who've yet to meet and get to know some people and clink glasses. That's going to happen, but it's just going to take some time. If I was to guess the timeline, and we've already booked our hotels and stuff for next year. I mean, if we can do tours in spring of 2021, that's great. But I'm not conning people with a rosy assessment. I'm being really candid with my public and with the people I work with. I'm hoping we have some tourism, kind of fragile, selling our tours with an idea that we don't know exactly if we can do it all we like to promise, but we're going to have a great time and we'll be able to go, I'm hoping, in late 2021. I'm thinking 2022 will be a kind of a break-even year, but we'll be back up and running. And then I'm hoping we'll be rocking again in 2023. So that's a little conservative, but that's how I would bet it. One thing that's been really on my mind so much, Elaine, is, and I'm concerned about this with post-COVID, to be viable, you got to pack the house. As a tour organizer, I need to make money. I need to pay my staff well. I need to pay my guides well. I need to hire all the experiences in Europe from the different vendors over there and pay them well. It's got to be an affordable experience for my public. And if I can only bring half as many people, it's just arithmetic. It can't be affordable. It's going to be either cheaper. I'm going to have to cut corners and not pay people like they deserve to be paid. I'm going to have to give up profit, or it's going to be more expensive for my tour members. You got to pack the house. You got to pack the plane. You got to pack the hotel, the restaurant, the tour bus. And then travel can be accessible. I don't want travel to be for elites. I want travel to be for just hardworking people that prioritize and want to go to Europe or go wherever. So I'm waiting for that day when we can fly to Europe with full planes. When I think about what will Europe be like after COVID, the metaphor I like to think about is an airport. Before terrorism, when I grew up, airports had wonderful wide open lobbies, and you would stroll to the gate and you'd kiss your loved ones goodbye. It was a beautiful thing. Now we hardly remember that. The lobbies are gone. They're filled with all the TSA apparatus, and you say goodbye to your loved ones on the curb. It's still an airport. It still functions fine as an airport, and it has become normal the way it is today. There might be some changes that way in Europe, but I do know that the demand does not dissipate. The demand gets backed up, and when it's free to travel again, we're going to have a lot of good demand. So the challenges for all of us who are in crisis right now, I've had no revenue since last October as a tour operator, 4 or 5 months before COVID hit. It's just, I've had no profit. And we've all got our monthly expenses going on. I've got 100 guides in Europe that are looking for work. It's tough. And we just got to find a way to hunker down and survive this. And then when we come out of it, we need to be, I think, we need to be really good, because the value of travel, the value of what we provide is going to be more important than ever. Because I just know the challenges confronting us in the future are going to be different than the challenges we grew up with. They're not going to be addressed with conventional defense. You're not going to build a wall to keep yourself safe. The challenges confronting us in the future, I just think COVID is the beginning. They're going to demand us as a society embracing science. We're going to have good governance. Thank God we're going to get good governance coming down the way now when it comes to a government that recognizes this problem and coordinates us all. We're going to have nations working with each other, working together, because the problems of the future are going to be blind to borders. You can't be okay in the United States and in chaos in Mexico, because that problem is just going to sweep over the border. So we need to get ourselves in a mindset where we're more inclined to build bridges and less inclined to build walls, and where we're more inclined to work together. And in that regard, I think tourism, travel, is going to be really more important than ever. And there'll be a huge demand for it. And we can all be leaders, and we can feel good about the work we're doing, as long as we have that ethic and that passion for helping people create a more sustainable and communicative world.
Right. Let me ask a quick question for our tour operators. So our tour operators have been working really hard to stay connected with their guests throughout the COVID crisis. So your Rick Steves No Travel Tips smash hit on social media. And then your new book, For the Love of Europe, came out this summer. So what other ways have you been keeping connected to your guests from the comfort of your own home?
Right. We have, with all my social media and all my writing and so on, we are doing things called a daily dose of Europe. And our mantra is, this COVID can derail our travel plans, but it can't stop our travel dreams. And, it's kind of funny. a year ago, I locked myself up, not knowing we'd be locked up this year, in order to write the book that, thank you for mentioning it, Elaine, that you just mentioned.
No problem, Rick.
I wrote a book called For the Love of Europe. And this is something I've wanted to do forever. It's a collection of my favorite 100 experiences in Europe. It's a 400-page book. And just to take time to collect all of this, and then I had to sweep out all the practical guidebook stuff, and it's just the magic of travel. And then the COVID hit us, and I'm not traveling this year. It's the first year in 30 years I've not gone to Europe. And this book just is like made to order for people dreaming about travel. So we're excerpting this book on our Facebook page. And this has been a real fun book to have out because it's designed for getting through a lockdown, for the love of Europe. But we're making our TV shows, and they're free for anybody. I've cut up my TV shows into 500 little bits that are immediately searchable. So if anybody is, let's say you've got a client who's curious about Malta, you can just type in Malta. Just before you're done typing Malta, you would have my 10-minute show on Malta. If you're thinking about Capri and you want to show somebody the Blue Grotto, just type in Capri and you've got my 4-minute little trip in the dinghy into the grotto there. Type in force feed and you've got geese right there, thousands of them being fed lots of corn. And you walk with the farmers through there and you see how they make the foie gras. Type in running of the, and you've got bulls in Pamplona. So that's called Classroom Europe. And we designed that for school teachers and parents homeschooling. And it's free. And we're just trying to keep people tuned into travel. But right now I'm sort of celebrating the traveler's mindset right here at home. And that's an interesting thing to do. And I'm sort of not promoting travel. I'm promoting patience because we've got something more fundamental than our bottom lines and our love of travel now. And it's just keeping our society together and getting through this COVID. Mm-hmm. So, we're in an interesting time. And I think we have to remember nobody gets through their lives, a good full life, or just historically, it doesn't happen where you don't get any interruptions. And I'm 65 years old and I waltzed right through 9/11. I waltzed right through the Great Recession in 2008. But this is a big deal, And as a tour operator, I say I waltzed right through those things.
Right.
But imagine if you were born in 1900. When you're 14 years old, you'd have World War I. 18 years old, you'd have the Great Pandemic. 29 years old, you're just ready to get your business going. You got the Great Depression. 39 years old, you're back on your feet. You got Hitler and the Holocaust. And you're 45 years old, and Europe is flattened, and you got to rebuild. And then finally, you're my age, and you get a normal kind of life going on. So we have 2020 is the 1940 of our lifetimes, and we'll get through it. And it hasn't even been a year yet. It's just tough economically, and it's tough because we love our work and we love to travel, and we can't do that now. But I'm feeling pretty darn confident that if we are patient and diligent, we'll get through this.
Yes, thank you. Well, we're almost done. So I want to give you some questions that have been put in the chat here by some of our audience here. So this is a great one. So this was Holly Joe. Many young people travel based on what they see on Instagram. How can we help them understand backdoor mindset?
Instagram.
Yeah,
this last year, I got to say, last year I was in 3 places that I know and love, and there was something weird going on. I was in Murin in Lauterbrunnen Valley in the Berner Oberland, south of Interlaken, and there's a stump, and there's a long line of people waiting to stand on the stump and get a shot of them like this for their Instagram photograph. Mm-hmm. Then I went to the Cinque Terre, where I've always gone, those 5 little beautiful towns in the Italian Riviera. And everybody always goes to Vernazza or Monterosso or Rio Maggiore. Nobody goes to Manarola. All of a sudden, the pier at Manarola is jammed with people. What's going on? Oh, that's where you go for your Instagram photograph.
Yes.
And then I was in Zermatt, and there's construction on a bridge. And I asked my friend from Zermatt, what are they building? We're building a theater for the Instagram people because every morning they were stopping traffic on our bridge to pose here in front of the Matterhorn. So you got this weird thing that people who don't even know the name of the town they're in travel there for their Instagram photograph. And it's just our lot in life. So what we need to do as tour organizers is say, okay, get your selfie and so on. But we need to have people be in the moment. Last time I was with a group in Lisbon, we were having our, it was a fado performance. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing to have our own private local musicians with these beautiful stringed instruments and so on. Everybody was jockeying around. You can imagine, 25 tourists at dinner trying to get their friend with the thing. And I just said, excuse me, let's take one piece of music tonight and get all of our photographs done. And then let's give our full attention to these wonderful musicians and put our cameras down. So we're going to start this song again, and you can take all the photographs you want. And then I don't want to see another camera for the rest of the evening.
Yeah.
And it took that kind of leadership. And was my group thankful for it? Yes. Because they got their photo, they got the concert without everybody taking selfies and photographs and videos, and they respected the local musicians. That's the kind of hands-on leadership. I think there's a lot of leadership that needs to go with organized tourism. And I got to say that so many tour guides, it's just human nature. Great, I've worked hard all day, dinner time, let them eat and give them the photo music. No, you're working. You got 25 or 30 or 40 people. They're having the one night in their life in Portugal where they can hear photo music. You do not get to take a break. I don't care how tired you are, you're working. You got 25 people's experience on the line and you got to defend it, you see. So there is this inane American brag to your friends on social media how good you look on the beach in France. Yes, that's going to happen, but you can moderate it and you can curate it and you can provide some leadership. And that's what I find we need to do with our guides. And that's why I get together with my guides and we talk about these things. And I think it really does matter.
Yeah. Okay, next question is, well, somebody asked about climate. So let's talk about climate advocacy as it relates to travel. What are some things that tour directors, guides, and operators can do to encourage ethical travel?
Well, climate, there's a lot of concerns you could have about ethical travel. Are you going to go to a bullfight? Are you going to eat foie gras? Are you going to go to Turkey? And
Right.
Those are you going to use Airbnb? There's lots of ethical issues and you can choose your battles. Climate change is not one that we have the option. We are contributing to climate change and there will be no tourism in 100 years if we don't figure this out. Our great-grandchildren will not be able to enjoy Europe or wherever they go if we don't do something. And as an industry, I think we should be doing something. I don't believe in shaming ourselves out of travel because of climate change. I believe in mitigation. Mitigation is pretty simple. I create this much bad. I need to do this much good to wipe out that bad. And it can do it. And I'm no scientist, but I've read enough and studied enough and talked with a lot of good people who are professionals in this. And I know that if I spend wisely $30, I will mitigate the carbon an American produces by traveling from the United States to Europe and back with their flight. So what I did, and I wish our government did this, I gave myself a carbon tax, a self-imposed carbon tax last year. I made $30 too much per person that I took to Europe in 2019. 30,000 people times $30, that's $900,000. I rounded up to $1 million. And then I gave myself a self-imposed $1 million carbon tax because my government doesn't do it, because my government is not caring about sustainable. My government is concerned about votes and what makes people wealthy right now. That's wrong. That's wrong even if you're smart and greedy, because we need to have it be sustainable. So this is not heroic. I'm not negating the downside of the many things we could be doing or anything like that. I'm just helping my travelers fly carbon neutral to Europe and back. So I chose 10 organizations. The conventional way would be to invest in climate offsets here, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to have a twofer. I wanted to invest in the developing world in a way that helps developing farmers do their work better and contribute less to climate change, because a huge contribution to climate change is in the developing world with farmers. Half of humanity are freeholder farmers, small family farms, contributing a lot of carbon by the way they do that and cutting down a lot of trees. So I've chosen, with our parameters, I've chosen 10 groups that are either advocating for the United States in the government to get serious about climate change, or funding third world programs that work on deforestation and climate smart agriculture. I'm so proud of this. I'm so excited about it. And just this week, we're announcing who we're going to be funding this next year. but we spent that $1 million on those 10 organizations. And now I can brag in my tour promotion that when you take a Rick Steves tour, you're going carbon neutral. We're investing in this enough to help you fly to Europe and back. And I give my whole reason why. And at the top of my program, it's at ricksteves.com. It says, if you're in tourism, please steal this and don't credit me.
Right.
Just take this program and be ethical when it comes to climate change, because tourism is important for peace. But tourism is also an important player in overcoming climate change. And if you have to charge $30 more, you got to do it. We should be paying our way. This year, if I use my multiplier, 0 travelers times $30 equals 0. But we've accomplished so much with our first year with $1 million that even though I don't have any revenue, we're going to give half. We're going to give $500,000 to the 10 groups that we like. And because they're just doing great stuff. I feel so good about what we accomplished. And I share it with 30,000 travelers. All 30,000 people who took a Rick Steves tour know that they contributed to this and their trip was carbon neutral. Again, it's not heroic. It's just a wash. It's just neutral. And it's just the ethical thing to do. But that takes leadership and ethics in a corporation. And I think that's tough in reality because a lot of publicly held corporations cannot be ethical. They are legally obligated to profit maximize in the short term. And it's a tough sell. But we need to get a little more serious about that. Climate change is real. And I've been putting it off a long time because I didn't want just a feel-good solution. I wanted to do something that really did make my tour company carbon neutral. And I think we're on the right track. So please, if you're in tourism, go to ricksteves.com and check out the climate section. And honestly, we've worked on it really hard. It's smart, it's complicated. It takes a little bit of brain energy to get figure it all out. But take that lock, stock, and barrel, put your own name on it, and be one of the companies that can brag about that. It's good. I think it's good business and it's ethical.
That's great. All right, let's look at another question. So how can DEOs or destination experience operators take advantage of local tourists?
Say that again. I don't quite understand the question.
Sure. So how can destination experience operators or DMCs take advantage of local tourists?
You mean independent tourists that are not on tour groups?
Local tourists. So my assumption of this question is tourists that I guess live in the place where they live in it. So how can you take advantage? How can a New York City DEO take advantage of the local New Yorkers?
Yeah, I'm such a not an insider in tourism. I don't know the different words. I hardly know. I hardly know the meaning of tour guide and tour operator, or tour director or manager, all this kind of stuff. So I get myself in trouble just because I don't know the terminology. And I don't really have a good answer for that question. I don't even think in terms of that because I'm all about sending people to another country. Of course, there's ways that you can promote your what you do well to local people. And I suppose that's a good thing to think of during COVID times because that's what you're having to do now. The big challenge for my guides right now is how to make a little money before we can have tour buses. You see, I think tourism is going to come back. Right now, there's essentially no tourism. Then you will have local people doing local things. The Parisians going to the French Riviera, the Romans going to the Italian hill towns, the Swiss hiking up to their Alps. Then you're going to have individual Americans going to Europe or Southeast Asia or whatever, who are more motivated and more nimble. And then you're going to have organized travel. That's going to be the last thing, buses and so on. But there's that interim period when people are traveling, and a lot of people will be traveling, and you won't have my bus, Rick Steves tour buses or any other buses rolling, and you'll have guides looking for work. So what I'm going to do as a person who cares about my guides who don't have employment right now is I'm going to try to connect individual travelers with individual guides so that they can hire each other. For the cost of taking a one-day Rick Steves tour, you could hire a private guide in Paris or Madrid or Lisbon or Copenhagen or Athens. And what a beautiful thing. And my guides want to work. They'd rather be on the front of a bus with 30 people, but they'll work with one family. And my people who want to go and they don't want to wait for the tourists to be going again, they'll go on their own and they'll connect. So I'm going to really put a lot of energy into being a conduit that way.
Mhm.
And right now we're not to that stage yet because we're not traveling at all. So what I've got on my tour sales page is something called our guides marketplace. And guides are doing virtual tours. And I'm not making any money at this. I'm just
Running a platform.
employing my staff,
Yeah.
who has not much else to do, to help organize this guides marketplace. And I've got 100 guides in Europe who are doing cool stuff. Some of it free, some of it for tips, and some of it for you pay to play. But guides are doing a lot of creative virtual stuff now until people can travel again. So if we're looking out for our guides, I think those are good things to do to help us get through this. But the main thing is just to still be standing when we come out of COVID so we can put those buses back on the road again in Europe.
Right. Okay, so I have one last question for you. In a normal year, we would this conference would be hosting a concurrent job fair, and tour directors and guides would be interviewing with tour operators from around the world. Can you share some of the qualities that Rick Steves Europe looks for when hiring for those positions?
Boy, that'd be an exciting moment to sit down for both people. For me to be able to talk to somebody who wants to be a tour guide, and for the tour guide to have an opportunity. If somebody was going to sit down with me and try to talk me into hiring them for my company, I'd want to see a passion for teaching. I'd want to see an expertise in a particular culture. You know, I need people who live and breathe Ireland to take tours around Ireland. I need somebody who really knows the Holy Land to do the Holy Land, not just a fancy tour guide, but somebody who has a foot in that culture. For me, it's important for somebody to speak the language. It's not a deal breaker, but it really helps. I want a philosophy where the guide, forgive me, I say guide, but I think that it's the tour director, manager, is a servant for the group. As I mentioned, I probably said a lot of things that raise some eyebrows of what I expect of a guide, but a guide is like the parent of the group, the loving scout leader, the servant, the person who maximizes group think. You know, if here's everybody gets one escargot, everybody gets one click of a Toblerone, everybody gets a little shot of this fancy schnapps with a little cultural background. You go along on the walks and you make sure people understand the communicating shortfalls of the local guide. I'd remind the person who wants to be a guide for me that you can't be everything. You're not going to find a scholar who's a comedian and a gourmet and a musician. You're going to find somebody who needs to play to their strengths. If you're a scholar, don't try to be funny. If you're a gourmet, you don't need to be a great musician. Just do what you do and do it with passion. I just like a guide who cares. I like a guide who can create magic moments. That to me is so exciting. Taking home those magic moments. When I take a group into St. Peter's Basilica, I've set it up. They know about St. Peter's Basilica. And we finally walk through that door and they're just overwhelmed by the interior of the greatest church in Christendom with these sunbeams shining through the dome Michelangelo designed. And I watch their faces. That's the treat for me. When I take people to Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, they climb that dark spiral staircase and they already know what Gothic is all about because we built a Gothic cathedral out of tourists. It takes 13. You got 6 pillars, 6 buttresses, and 1 spire. You build a Gothic cathedral out of tourists.
Yeah.
Now they're going to see the actual buttresses and spires and windows and so on. And then they walk up that spiral staircase and they pop out in the greatest Gothic interior in all of Europe, Sainte-Chapelle. And you just see them just almost overcome by the beauty of it because they understand it, because the guide did his or her work beforehand. That's very rewarding for me. To take somebody to a 0-kilometer meal in Tuscany, where everything was made right there, and to explain what is a 0-kilometer meal and why are the Italians so into this slow food business. To go to a restaurant, a mom and pop restaurant where the family makes their own wine, and to sit down and to see the vintner grasp the bottle of wine in a way where the family's name on the label shows, and he pours that wine. And grandma is sitting right over there, so thrilled that their dining room is filled with Americans, and their fruit of their labor, the liquid culture, their heritage is being poured into the glasses of these American travelers. That's a great moment to design a travel experience so that my tour members take home that ultimate souvenir. And that's an understanding that the world is filled with joy, it's filled with love, it's filled with good people. And it's probably also filled with a big desire to take another Rick Steves tour. You see, that's, to me, that's good business. And any tour company can do that. But if your mission is to keep them in the dark and sell them optional tours, or keep them away from this so they have to go shopping with you for kickbacks here, there's a place for that way of making money, but it can't be based on keeping travelers in the dark. I think it has to be based on a respect for your travelers and an understanding of why they go to Europe. So huge opportunities that way. And as a tour guide, I need somebody who embraces that, who's enthusiastic about it. It's hard work to be a guide. You've got to, it's just like it's hard work to be a teacher. You don't choose to be a teacher because you want something easy and you want to make a lot of money. There's other things I suppose you could try to do. But to be a guide, you've got to love travel. You've got to love teaching. You've got to have a way with people, and you've got to care.
Right. Well, Rick, I'll say, if you think the idea of sitting down with tour directors and guides is exciting, maybe we can have a table for you next year. We'd be very happy to have you interviewing at our conference. I had to put that out there for tour directors.
Sure.
Well, good. Yes, love it.
Well,
all right. Well, yes.
Elaine, it's just been so much fun. It's been an honor to share these ideas. I very rarely get to talk to people in the industry like this, and I hope that it's been a worthwhile hour for people. And congratulations on all you're doing, because the network that's happening in your gathering there, I'm sure, is just really golden for a lot of people. And I feel like we got to hold it together. We got to be patient, and we got to be confident that we're going to be looking back at this COVID time before we know it. And it's going to be part of our lore. We're going to talk about, remember back in 2020, and we're going to be taking people around, and we're going to be showing them all the travel.
That's right. Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here with us. This has been a wonderful experience, and we'll have you back anytime.
I hope so. Okay. Thank you. Happy travels, even if we're just staying home for a while.
All right. Thanks, Rick.